Tremaine mentioned this also, the cultivar or variety location combination is critical. You need to have varieties that are going to survive the winters and ripen every season at your particular site. And that's not easy to do. It varies from region to region, depending again on how cold you get and what the length of your growing season is. So I've been doing, as I said, cultivar research for many years, trying to come up with the best combinations throughout the state of Maryland. So these are the recommended and potential suggestive varieties for diverse regions of Maryland that we're going to be talking about. Again, the wine's made in the vineyard. Our objective is to make great wine. So the best way to make great wine is to produce great grapes, and that means having the right cultivar in the right location. So here are the considerations. Climate-cultivar interaction is critical. Consistent production at your site, consistently high quality at your site, and all these things are involved. The cold hardiness, disease pressure, temperature during ripening. We like warm days and cool nights during ripening. If we're ripening during August, you're going to have some challenges because you're going to have warm days and warm nights. If you're harvesting in November or November or December, you know what the obvious problems will be there. You're a little bit late for ripening. So, but you want to be ripe 100% fully mature in all or the great majority of years to have the best quality. And of course, if you're just a vineyard, you have to have the demand by existing vineyards. You can't grow varieties that no one's going to buy from you. And if you're a winery, of course, people are coming in and they want to taste the wine, so they have the advantage of point of sale, where even if you're growing a variety they're not aware of, and they come in and they say, I want to taste your Chardonnay, and you say, well, we don't grow Chardonnay, we grow Chardonnay, which is a hybrid of Chardonnay, and it's more sustainable here, it grows better, and it actually produces better wine, and here, taste the wine, and that's how you convince them that it works. So you do have that advantage. But again, crop value consistently exceeds the cost of the production. You know, back to that rule that the vines have to be alive to produce good grapes. That works for you. Here's the preferred conditions that we're looking for: moderate winters, limited late frost, preferably minimum temperature never below 0, very excessively well-drained, low fertility soils, warm sunny days during ripening, preferably less than 90 degrees, cool nights during ripening, preferably right around 65, so a nice diurnal fluctuation, limited precipitation from veraison to harvest, and preferably limited precipitation throughout the growing season. Anyone has this site here, all these preferences, I'm willing to invest in the site with you, but the bad news is practically no one has this. The good news is most sites have this most of the years. In the East, there's always some flip-flops here and there, but the majority of people can say we have most of these conditions if you do the proper site selections. And again, fully ripened grapes each year are our goal, what we're looking for, uniformly ripened grapes. Again, I mentioned this one in the site selection. Know your site. The cold hardiness, the minimum winter temperatures that you're dealing with is going to be the bottom line of picking the cultivar you're working with. Again, we have vinifera grapes, hybrid grapes, and American grapes, differing levels of winter hardiness, and that's what's going to be to make your decision. The opposite end during the summer is the length of the growing season. If you have a really long growing variety or one that requires a long growing season, they're not going to do very well out here. And if you have varieties that are really short season, they're not going to do as well over here because they're going to be ripening in the heat. So again, that cultivar location interaction is really critical. And we've been working hard. I've been doing this for 20 years here in Maryland and for about 15 years in New Jersey, which had a similar disparity in the type of conditions we've dealt with there, in trying to find cultivars that are adapted to the area, both the length of the growing season and tolerate the winter problems, and hopefully tolerate disease is one that's looking more and more important as we get warmer summers and more humidity. And of course, I can talk to people until they're blue in the face about how well a cultivar does in the field, but the wine quality is the bottom line. You know, we have varieties that do very well in the field. They're practically bulletproof in the vineyard, but the wine is less than acceptable quality for what the public is looking for. So that's why I call them, I say my wine is my data. When someone asks me about growing a cultivar, I say not only its viticultural characteristics, but also the enological or the wine characteristics are acceptable for the bottom line. So I was talking about growing season. The length of the growing season, and different varieties need different lengths of growing season to ripen. So here are what we do, kind of divide cultivars into cool season, intermediate, and warm season, hot season crops. As you can see, this is the average growing temperature here. Most of the sites we have in Maryland are in this range, 63 to 66 average temperature. So what you look for is when you draw the line down here, you look for varieties or cultivars that intersect in wherever your average growing temperature is. So we had cooler sites where you get higher elevations, the Miller Turgals, Pinot Gris, and these varieties do a little bit better. As we get into the warmer sites where we are, most of Maryland, this is the group that's typically doing well. And a lot of these guys are either not going to harvest well or not going to ripen well on most seasons here, so we do not recommend those. When we grow varieties like this, we tend to have problems with them harvesting too early, so they don't have good fruit quality, or they rot because of the heat in which they're growing. So we look for the average, and this is how that GeoVine works. They look for the average temperature during the season in your location. We drop the line down here and we see which varieties are going to do best. So that gives you a first line idea of where we want to be. So I've been talking about the different types of grapes and how they matter to making your choice for cultivar choices. And again, we have vinifera grapes, we have hybrid grapes, which are hybrids between Americans and the vinifera, and then we have the American grapes that are American species alone. So you have Native American and vinifera. These are the fine wine grapes of the world, Chardonnay, Cabernet. These are the ones most of the variety names. The hybrids were produced in the late 1800s in France that would have the quality, hopefully the quality of the vinifera with the disease and insect resistance of the American. So that's why those hybrids were made. So if you hear Chardonnay, Chambourcin, Cayuga White, Vidal Blanc, these are all hybrids. And then there are Native American species, that's the Concord, Niagara, Isabella, and things like that that are 100% American species. There's also a group of new hybrids that were produced up in Minnesota that I was telling you about that have a different American species, and these are much more cold hardy and tolerate our winters, and we'll talk about those. So vinifera must be grafted to pest-tolerant rootstock, and as a group, the vinifera are more susceptible to fungal diseases and certain other pathogens. Vinifera are more susceptible to cold injury, and this is the order of susceptibility. The hybrids, or the Americans, are most winter-tolerant, hybrids intermediate, and the vinifera most sensitive. But vinifera grapes prices are roughly twice that of hybrids or American species of grapes. So the vinifera have more problems, but they make better wine quality, and typically you can get a higher value in the field. Now there are Chambourcin and Vidal are definitely hybrids that are higher value and work well for us in our environment. Just to give you a feel for prices of the ranges that you can get, you see here from Cabernet Sauvignon, these are the vinifera up here, these are the hybrids, and this is an American down here. So you see the average and the range of prices that you can deal with. These are actually fairly high levels for Concord. You typically find these in the $400 to $600 range when you're looking for them. But there can be a wide range depending on the quality and the demand by the wineries. So more challenging to grow, but higher prices and higher opportunities there. Another thing that's getting more and more interest, of course, is disease resistance. And grapes is probably the one crop of any agricultural crop that's different in that it's grown because people know the variety as far as the wine names are concerned. So it's really hard to get someone to switch from Chardonnay to Chardonnay, or from some traditional hybrid or vinifera variety to a hybrid that's more disease resistant, because people know the names of the varieties as far as the wine concerned. It's hard to get the wineries to switch with that, but there is a huge range of resistance. The plot that Dave and Ben have been showing you about, the establishment, this is that plot there. This is also part of it. You see here there was 27 cultivars that were planted, 25 were vinifera and 2 were hybrids. And guess what? Here's the hybrids and here's all the vinifera. And this is because these are all defoliated from downy mildew, powdery mildew, etc. And these are the hybrids which are more resistant. So same thing for the table grapes. We found the same thing, which we were fine with that. So there are hybrids that are more disease resistant. Again, they grow better. The challenging is to be able to make the wine quality and to get the consumer acceptance for that. I did mention about, we talked about grafting and rootstocks. If you're growing vinifera grapes and the majority of the hybrids, they should be grafted to a rootstock. You don't have to worry about this other than when you order it from a nursery, you automatically order grafted vines. So when you call a nursery, they'll say, if I want Chardonnay, they'll say, what rootstock do you want it on? And typically, we want 3309, 10114, or possibly Riparia Gloire. But these are the two workhorses for Maryland. They're tolerant of nematodes to a certain extent, tolerant of our wet soils, especially 10114 is more tolerant of wet soils for Southern Maryland. But this is Chardonnay vine that's grafted. This is a Chardonnay vine that's not grafted. And the Phylloxera is getting to this one and taking it down. Phylloxera is a aphid that feeds on the roots and will eventually kill the plant. So that's why we grafted to pest-tolerant rootstocks. Okay, rootstock selection. Again, Phylloxera resistant. There's other things we can manage, but the recommended ones, 3309, 10114, and Riparia Gloire is a little more slower growing, a little less vigorous to start with, but then catches up. Okay, I'm going to go through a group of varieties. I'm not going to go in gory detail any of these. I'm just going to kind of hit the highlights of these. But these are ones that we've tested over time in the region over years. We'll highlight the resistances, the pluses and minuses of these, and again, and hopefully any regional differences when you're dealing. So this is basically what the slides will look like. I either have strength and weaknesses, or talk about the good and the bad, and then possibly the wine quality. So we'll start with whites, start with hybrids, and then go through to the white vinifera and on to the reds. Cayuga White is a hybrid that was developed in New York State. It's developed for its cold hardiness and its disease resistance, and it is a strong producer and a very good generic white wine if you're looking to make that. Good cold hardiness, good yield, excellent disease resistance. So it's a beast in the vineyard, easy to grow. Weaknesses, can overcrop. If the grapes get really ripe, it tends to have more of that American type quality flavor, that grape juice or grape jelly type aromas and flavors that are not typically desirable in the wine, but can be a workhorse and do very well for basic wines and blending. Vidal Blanc, we've mentioned a bunch of times. This is the #1 white hybrid in the state by a long shot, grown highly in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and New Jersey. By far the #1 white grape for the hybrid. Good hold hardiness, high yields. You can get 4 to 10 tons per acre with no problem with this one. Versatile workhorse in the winery, can produce all different kinds of wine from sparkling through to late harvest. Very versatile in there. Can be prone, because it crops so much, can be prone to overcropping, which can reduce the quality. Definitely susceptible to downy mildew, which you have to watch, and needs to be grafted for susceptibility to tobacco ring spot and things like that. We're also starting to see, with the hotter climates, getting more late season rots on Vidal. When I had it in New Jersey, I used to say it was bulletproof. I never saw any late season rots on it, and now if we're not careful with it, it could be just as susceptible as any of the vinifera to late season rots. So it's a workhorse, and highly recommended for most vineyards in Maryland, all over the place. Ceval used to be the #1 hybrid in the area. Has kind of fallen off of favor because it gets sour rot pretty badly, and it's hard to manage. And most people are finding that Vidal and Chardonnay and other things can produce comparable wine quality. So it is versatile. It still does pretty well in the vineyard, but kind of going out of favor for other opportunities. And this is one of the guys that's replaced it. Chardonnay is a genetic hybrid between Ceval Blanc and Chardonnay. And it's actually better than both parents. Makes no real genetic sense to me. You have Chardonnay is the example the plant pathologists use for getting all of the diseases that are known to man in the vineyard. They plant it as their check varieties. And Ceval Blanc, as I mentioned, got sour rot and had some other problems in the vineyard. They made this genetic hybrid, and it seems to be much better than either of the parents or both of the parents. It's got good cold hardiness, good heat tolerance, and seems to be very highly resistant to downy mildew, which we're not sure where that resistance came from, but it's working. Mid-season harvest, which I like. It's not too early. Consistent cropping, limited local testing, but it's gaining more and more acceptance. Definitely, that was the vine I showed you that was dying due to phylloxera, so it needs to be grafted. So makes nice wine, very easy to grow in the field, and highly recommend it. This is during 2018 when we had the worst downy mildew infections I've ever seen. in my 30 years, and it was completely clean. This, along with a couple of the hybrids I'll show you in a second. No downy mildew at all, just beautiful in the vineyard. So highly recommend it for Maryland conditions, for reducing downy mildew problems, and makes very nice wine.
When grown properly and vinified properly, you cannot tell it from Chardonnay.
Okay, and that's working very well in Southern Maryland for sure, so it's a good one for down there. Traminette's another genetic hybrid. It's a Gewürztraminer, or Riesling in its Riesling type aromatics in its background. And again, you can see during harvest there, beautiful resistance on the leaves and the clusters here, but it's just a monster in the vineyard. Highly, highly vigorous. We had the 27 varieties at Upper Marlborough. My daughter and Dave's daughter were doing the canopy management, and it would take them about a week to go through the 25 vinifera varieties and take them another week to go through the 2 hybrid varieties and manage them, because they were just, you know, they were afraid they were going to get caught in there and we'd never find them because of the jungle. They were just extremely, extremely vigorous. So that is the main challenge for growing this one. It does make nice wine quality, comparable to Riesling, and we can't grow Riesling in this area because it's more of a cool climate grape. So if you're looking for that kind of aromatics, it works well, but just be ready to be out there with machetes and hacking it back. And the raccoons absolutely love it. We had a lot of trouble getting a harvest at Upper Marlborough, keeping the raccoons out of it. One of the things I mentioned about importing varieties from around the world, there was a breeding program in Eastern Europe and the old Soviet Union, Hungary, Bulgaria, Georgia, Uzbekistan, where they were making hybrids with vinifera, the genetic French hybrids, and they were bringing in Vitis amurensis, which is their local hybrid, which has disease resistance and cold hardiness. And they were making all these complex hybrids. I was blessed to work with Bob Goodman, who was importing those in the 1980s. I had them tested at Rutgers and here in Maryland. We have some beautiful, beautiful hybrid. We have about 20 that I tested, of which there's 4 or 5 that we've been pushing ahead with. 3 of these have really been superior. This SK7753 has downy mildew resistance similar to Chardonnay. We don't see any downy mildew in the field. Produces a beautiful aromatic wine. So easy to grow, making nice wine. The big problem is they're numbered. They don't have names. So you have to put them in complex wines where you're making blends, but I think worth it in a sustainable vineyard. We showed you the resistance in the other field. This is a commercial vineyard at Big Cork. This is Petit Verdot here, and this is Cabernet Franc, 2 commonly grown varieties, and you see they're just ravaged with downy mildew. And here's the racing stripes, we call them, in the middle of the vineyard. We have 5 rows of SK7753, and you see just massive amount of leaves, just not being affected at all by the downy mildew in the vineyard. So easy to grow, and it's they put it in a wine called Cleverly Russian Kiss, and it's their number 1 selling wine throughout the year. So easy to grow and makes nice wine quality.
They're real vigorous with foliage. They produce a large amount of bunches.
Yes, they're very similar. Actually, they're not that much more vigorous. It's just the leaves don't go away. They're no more. The SK77 is no more vigorous than the vinifera or other hybrids. It's just the leaves don't die. So that's not showing more vigor. That's just showing survival of the leaves in October. Good call. Good question. Some of the new varieties that have been showing interest and really gaining popularity in the state. Albarino is one from Spain and Galicia. Nice loose clusters. There's 2 different clones of these, clone 1 and clone 2. Different characteristics in the field, but good characteristics of the wine. We have 4 or 5 wineries that are doing a great job with this one right now, and I'm very high on it with the wine quality and its performance in the vineyard. So it is on the recommended list. Pinot Blanc is not widely planted, but it's been one of my favorites. We have a lot of Pinot Grigio in the state. I think Pinot Blanc is a step up as far as decreased disease problems and a little bit better wine quality. And I think it's worth a try. We're trying to get some commercial people interested in it, but it's one of my favorite wines. I did bring an example of this for you to taste tonight or tomorrow during the tasting. Here's Pinot Gris. It's a brother, actually a mutation of Pinot Blanc. You see the color, the gray color of the fruit here, but it does produce a white wine when it's vinified properly. Adaptable cultivar, really early harvest, which makes it a little bit limiting. Tight clusters, which makes it more susceptible to bunch rot, but it makes a very, very nice wine, which is in high demand in Maryland for either Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio, same name, just a French versus Italian names. Chardonnay is by far the biggest workhorse of any of the grapes, the white grapes in the Mid-Atlantic. It's the #1 grape in Virginia, #1 grape, vinifera grape, white for sure here in Maryland. Produces great wine no matter whether you're on the Western Shore or the Eastern Shore. Produces different wines throughout Maryland, but all of good quality. But like I said, it is the poster child for disease susceptibility around the state. It does get just about every disease known to man. So you're going to be spraying it, but it can produce very good wine when you're producing it. One of the other major limitations is early bud break. I was talking about when you have locations where you have late frost. This is a concern because it's one of the cultivars that breaks its bud early and is most susceptible to damage if you have a location or a site where you do have a risk of late frost. And again, susceptible to botrytis, powdery mildew, downy mildew, and grapevine yellows. So if you're a pathologist, you'd love to have this in your vineyard, but I said it does make great wine. One of my favorites that I've tested throughout the years, and it's been challenging to get it accepted by commercial growers. Part of it is because the name is Colombard, or most people know it as French Colombard. We were talking about jug wines earlier today. This was the grape that was used in jug wines throughout the the 70s and 80s in California. And one of the reasons it is because it produces massive amounts of grapes. We can easily get 6, 7, 8 tons of grapes per year per harvest in this per ton per year in these grapes. They're really, really workhorses in the vineyard. But it's 100% vinifera, grows well, no different than any other vinifera, especially a little more versatile or a little better than Chardonnay in the field as far as downy mildew and fruit rots are concerned. Consistent production. We just have limited testing here and limited acceptance. But if I was growing grapes in Maryland, this would be my workhorse white that was in the vineyard. Makes a nice varietal wine and can be blended and used in many ways.
You have that in your test plots?
I have that in test plots, both west and east, and it's done quite well. And I have wine here for you to try. Yeah, I've had this in tests since 2008, and it's been one of the more bulletproof varieties. So one of the alternatives that I think I highly recommend. One of the new ones that's come on recently that I'm really high about is called Gruner Veltliner. It's from Austria and some grown in Italy and Germany. Been gaining a lot of interest in southeastern Pennsylvania where they're making some beautiful wines with it. It's been so far, I've harvested it 4 times, been consistent yields where we need it. Seems to have good heat tolerance, although it does a little better in the cooler climates than it does in the hot climates as far as giving the true character of the fruit and the true character or the mineral character that we expect from the wine. But it's been doing very well. There's some down in Virginia. They test it and new people getting some interest there. When I poured it last week in Virginia, and I poured it blind and I asked people what they thought of wine, and it was the most people who ever raised their hand and saying they like a wine of any wine they ever poured in that tasting. It was like 95% said they liked it. So some great possibility and worth a try here in Maryland. One of my other favorites besides Colombard over the years has been Roussanne. This is from the Rhone area of France. I have Roussanne and Marsanne planted side by side. Typically they would do the same. Roussanne was a much better performer, made it through the winters better, more disease resistant, more resistant to late season rots, a much better performer, and I think making some really, really nice, complex aromatic structured wines and do quite well. Again, I have one of these for you to taste tonight and or tomorrow. Worth a try for trying in Maryland. Sauvignon Blanc, that's one that has had a bad rap overall in Maryland because it is susceptible to late season rots and bunch rots because of the tight clusters. But with the available pest management techniques that we have, we can grow a fairly good crop of Sauvignon Blanc, and it is making nice character wines both in the Western Shore and on the Eastern Shore. So I think it deserves a try. Some of the wineries on in the Annapolis area as well as on the Eastern Shore are making very nice varietal character wines that I think are better than anything that we're getting from New Zealand. So worth a try there. Again, maybe possibly susceptible to bunch rots, so you really have to manage it properly, but it can be done. Switching on to the reds, Chambourcin is one of my favorite varieties throughout vineyard. I recommend Chambourcin in every vineyard in Maryland. I think it's the one that's most bulletproof of any of the red varieties we produce. 2018, it came through with a full crop when other things had no crop whatsoever. So a little bit more of a challenge in the vineyard than in the winery, or in the winery than in the vineyard, but it can be made into a nice wine if it's treated like a vinifera. A lot of the hybrids in the field and in the winery kind of get this secondhand treatment where they're not managed as well in the vineyard and they're not given the full treatment like they would in the wineries. A vinifera would be, as far as giving them French oak and things. If we treat them properly, they produce very, very good premium wine quality, and I think they're worth a try, especially just as an insurance policy in most vineyards in Maryland. High quality, versatile, high yield per acre. We can get, again, 3 to 8 tons per acre. Not a problem with this one. A little bit late ripening for some spots in Maryland, but overall, most places we can get it fully ripened every year. Regent or Regant is one of the new ones we've been testing throughout the state. It's a Chambourcin hybrid with more vinifera in its background. I've only had it 2 years here in Maryland. I have not made wines with it, but other people have had it in Pennsylvania and Virginia and other places in Ohio are very, very high on this one and think it has great potential. It seems to be performing like Chambourcin in the vineyard, but some of the wines saying it's a little more vinifera-like, more consistent color, more stable color in the winery. So I think it's worth a shot. If anyone has experience with this one, I'd like to hear how they've done with it. Merlot is one that everyone would love to grow in Maryland, but it's one of the more cold sensitive ones. So if you have a premium spot for it, I would definitely suggest growing it because it does make a great wine on its own and is a great blender. Big problem it is cold tender. And in the 13-14 winter and the 14-15 winter, we had probably 20 to 30% of the vines throughout the state were killed from this. Even some really good sites had problems with Merlot making it through the winter. So if you have a premium site, it's worth it, but just know that there is a risk with some damage. If you have a site, make sure it's at the best place in your site, the highest point, and the most resistant spot to cold damage. But worth it if you can plant it on a good site. Lemberger has been one of my favorites since being in New Jersey and here. It's a mid-season harvest. Its biggest problem is the name. Who wants to plant a grape that sounds like stinky cheese? But that's, if you can get past that. Some people are calling it Blaufränkisch, which I don't know if that's a step up or a step down. But that is the native name where it comes from in Austria. Yeah, they call that the lesser of evils, I think. So Lemberger or Blaufränkisch. But I love the grape in the vineyard. It grows very well. A little bit susceptible. It is tight cluster, but doesn't seem to have a lot of problems with the late season rots. You have to manage the crop. If it gets more than 3.5, 4 tons per acre, you're making a nice rosé instead of a nice red wine, but it has performed very well for me. It makes, I think, much better than Syrah. It makes a similar wine to Syrah with nice peppery background and does well in the vineyard. Again, preferable in the cooler climates up in the north versus the hotter climates in the east. It doesn't do quite as well and the color is not as good. Camfranc
colored crop sensitivity. What is that?
Yeah, it's sensitive to, if you high crop it, if you give it more than 4 or 5 tons per acre, the color drops off and you end up with a rosé wine instead of a red wine. Yeah. Cabernet Franc by far is the grape I think that is best adapted to Maryland. It is 100% vinifera. It's it grows in Bordeaux, France, and a couple other areas in France. It's better than Cabernet Sauvignon in getting ripened every year, and better than Merlot that it's less cold sensitive. So this is the vinifera red workhorse in Maryland. Highly recommend it in just about any site where we can grow it. Good rot resistance, cold hardiness as good if not better than Sauvignon. Ripens earlier than Cab, so we can get it ripened every year. Occasional problem with poor fruit set, but fairly not a huge problem, fairly consistent. Leaf roll virus is a major one, so make sure when you get vines from the nursery they're certified clean, and you need to make sure we're not overcropping it because the grapes or the wine could be a little bit green peppery or herbaceous if you overcrop it. It suffers from they call dysynchronous ripening. In other words, the grapes in the cluster ripen at different rates, so you'll have ripened grapes and underripened grapes in the same cluster. So it needs to ripen fully to get the uniform flavors. But it can be done in most locations in Maryland, and highly recommend it there. Petit Verdot is another one that's a more fairly recent addition to Maryland and Virginia in the area, but also highly recommend it on the list. I harvest this at my vineyard right near Cabernet Franc, so we get it ripened every year. It's been a good producer for us, nice loose clusters, many clusters per cane, so it's working well for us. But again, the ripening season gets ripened every year. A little bit high acid and high pH in some years, so it's a little bit of difficulty managing it in the winery, although when you're blending it, typically as you would with Cab Franc and or Cab Sauvignon and Merlot, we tend to be able to bring that in. And the wine's a little bit unidimensional, tends to be more front palate than back, but again, with blending, we can take care of that. But super color.
Your managers say it's the easiest of the vinifera to grow. On the winemaking side, I've dealt with winemakers who I have a red wine I need to kick up a notch, put in some Petit Verdot. So good winemakers really like it. Say vineyard managers say it's a nice one to grow.
Yeah, I agree. This is, I'm higher than this one for sure than Cabernet Sauvignon. It's right below Cabernet Franc or right in there with it as far as I'm concerned. And I like the wine blended, I like it blended into things, but I also like to blend other things into it as far as being straight varietal. But highly recommend it for most locations in Maryland. Barbera is one of the first new grapes I planted when I got into Maryland, knowing what the sites were like. It grows all over Italy on warm sites, cool sites, and gets ripened full years. But in the hot sites, which I was critical in southern Maryland, it grows well, fairly tolerates our rots pretty well, but most importantly, it holds its acid well and holds its color well. And they're the critical factors in hot climate, holding the color and holding their acids. And this one does this. So southern Maryland and the Eastern Shore have quite a bit of Barbera planted. It makes a wonderful rosé and makes a wonderful red, consistent red wine. One of the best, some of the best wines coming out of shore consistently have been coming from this grape. So
I'm a big Barbera promoter. It grows well all over the state, just like Italy. It's producing great wines, and I'm on the marketing end. A lot of marketing people say, you know, an area state needs to have this as our grape, like Virginia does with some of theirs. Barbera is vinifera, and the wine snobs want vinifera. You can pronounce it, and no other place in America has claimed it. So I see it's a good promotion that way. The vineyard people do say it takes a little bit more management in the vineyard.
yeah, if the clusters are touching each other, there may be problems if it's overcropping, but yes, if it's managed in the vineyard, it does very well. Bruce has been the biggest cheerleader for this one. It's been good having him with this one. Cabernet Sauvignon, I've mentioned a bunch of times as a comparison. Most people would love to grow Cabernet Sauvignon in the Mid-Atlantic, but it is one of the biggest challenging grapes to grow. It has some late season rot problems, which is its big limitation right now. Cold sensitive, not that cold sensitive. The big problem is getting it consistently ripened each year. It's one of the later season reds we have. In general, in the Mid-Atlantic, they say 3 out of 10 years it makes a fabulous wine. 3 out of 10 years it makes a decent wine. And the other 4 years it's pretty much insipid and needs to be blended. So, and from a business standpoint, it's hard to really say we can justify growing a grape that's only producing great wine 3 out of 10 years. So if you have a site where you can do it and get it ripened each year, go for it. If you have a small acreage that you want to dedicate to it and use it for blending and use it when it works well, absolutely worth a try. But again, only the best sites. And again, I'd much rather see Cabernet Franc or more acreage of Cabernet Franc and Cabernet and Petit Verdot. And I was interested even in Virginia to hear that Cabernet Sauvignon is going out, and Franc and Verdot are being moved in more and more. So that was encouraging to see. We've been in the same track in New Jersey and Maryland for years, so that's encouraging. One of the ones that I've been testing for years that I'm really high on is called Tiraldigo. It's a 100% vinifera from northeastern part of Italy. Beautiful, large clusters. It's a very vigorous vine in the vineyard, and it is somewhat susceptible to downy mildew, as most of the vinifera. But it is very vigorous, but it produces consistent crop. Mid-late season, it's right in my vineyards, it's right in with Cabernet Franc, so we get it ripened pretty much each season. A little less downy mildew than some of the other Italians, but in general it is susceptible. I wouldn't say that, but big dark, ripe wine. This is by far, when I make this wine, I usually have to dilute it somewhere between 5 and 10% with water just to get it to the point where it's actually drinkable, that it's not too intense. So it could be a great blender, as Petit Verdot is, but also it's a great standalone wine. And again, I brought some examples for you to try this, but holds its acid well, big, ripe, big, spicy, soft tannins, great food wine due to acidity. So worth a try. Again, if I'm planting a vineyard in Maryland, I'm definitely putting some of this in to give it a try. So I mentioned if you're living in way out in the west in southern Alaska and you really want to grow grapes, we have varieties that work for you. These varieties were developed in breeding programs in Minnesota and Wisconsin and can tolerate minus 25 and minus 30 and still produce a full crop. So they're pretty amazing grapes. The challenge is getting them fully ripened each year. They tend to have really high acid, and it's hard to get the wine in balance because they're difficult to get fully ripened. I know in Wisconsin and Minnesota where they grow them, the acidity could be 1.5, 1.6. Much higher, double than what we have here. So it is a challenge there, but I think they have great potential, especially something like Marquette, which has great color and holds its acid. That could be a great variety for the Eastern Shore. We have some of this planted in test trials to see how it works on the Eastern Shore. So they make nice aromatic wines, just a little bit, they're easy in the vineyard, but more challenging in the winery. So if you have to grow something that's very cold hardy, these are the ones to grow. If you want to try something with good color and holds its acid, I think the Marquette would be a worthwhile trial. So I've tried a bunch of white varieties over time. This is just a partial list of things we've had. In general, the ones in green here are the ones that get the go and have been on the recommended list. I won't go into any of the details here. I mentioned a good portion of them at this point. The yellow ones are ones that are being tested or have been tested, are doing okay, either need more testing or have some limitations. So I have the caution sign on those. Vermentino is one I haven't tested for very long, but I'm really high on that one. I think it has some great potential, as does Arnace in the state. Some of them are just hard to pronounce and people aren't familiar with them, but they make very, very nice wine. And there's a group of them that we've kind of pushed out. Valvan Muscat is a hybrid that gets rupestre speckle and can be defoliated, so we haven't been planting as much as that. Malvasia rots just it rots before it even gets ripened. It's really rot susceptible, so we've stayed away from that one. So there's some limitations with all these, but anything in the green I think is worth a try and can be good in the state. Same with the reds. Here's a whole group that are moving into the recommended list. Carmenere and Malbec, I love both of those. Carmenere doesn't produce consistent crops from year to year, so we've kind of keeping that off the recommended list. We'll get 3 tons per acre, 4 tons per acre, and then 1 ton per acre. And then 3 tons per acre, 3.5 tons per acre, and half a ton per acre. And again, over a 10-year period, that can that add up to be some problems with you. Malbec, I love, similar to Merlot, makes great wine, soft, beautiful red wine in Maryland, but in 13-14 and 14-15 winters, we lost probably 40% of the vines throughout the state, even in really, really good sites and good locations. So again, premium sites only, and beware, you might have some cold sensitive problems. I have a bunch of Italians. As you can know, you can tell from my name, I'm half Italian and half Italian, so I tend to go to Italy for a lot of my go-to varieties. So Montepulciano, Corvina, Vespolino, Schippettino, Sagrantino, all these are doing very well over the last few years. I've only made wine out of them 2 or 3 years, but not ready to recommend them, but I think they have some great potential. I'm real high on Tempranillo and Montepulciano, both of those doing very well in the trials. As far as the white guys over here, not on the recommended list. Syrah. There's a couple people that do a great job in Maryland, but the great majority of people who've grown Syrah have torn it out, and that was the happiest day of their life when they got rid of it. Sangiovese can be a challenge. You got to really manage it well and get the right clones. If you have the right clone, manage it very highly. It can be tremendous. If you don't, it could be another nightmare. Pinot Noir are really hard to get it in with. When it gets 3 or 4 days before it's ripe, it just starts melting down, and in your high climates, you need a real high elevation site if that one's going to work. Petit Syrah is one of my favorite wines to drink, but I've tried for 8 years to make a decent wine in Maryland. It just doesn't work. These guys are mostly too disease susceptible and rot susceptible. So if you want to talk about it as potential entities, I'd love to talk to you, and I can share the wine with you. But bottom line, the wine marketing, know your clientele, know what they will buy. but know your site, know the limitations, know which grapes will survive the winters and get through and make high quality wine each year. And again, take an occasional risk. Plant, when you're planting your vineyard, put in 25 vines of this, 25 vines of that. You may find the next premium variety for your location in Maryland. You may find something that not recommended but does very well and producing high quality wine at your site. Just want to thank the contributors to my research, some of the research vineyards that allowed me to put their plots in there, and all the grant money we've gotten, and some of the nurseries and commercial companies that donate to my program. So that's it. Sorry for running a little bit over here. Just wanted to cover those. There's lots of opportunities for cultivars in Maryland. We have the traditional ones that people know, and lots of good opportunities and alternatives that can be planted and produce great wine from. Sometimes you need to take a specific niche, whether it's all the Italians or the Spanish or the Portuguese varieties, and do something unique to make it work in Maryland.